All right, welcome to the Coder Kids podcast, episode 58. James Thornock here, back from the dead. We have a guest on the show today, Wes Shields, so welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this podcast really is going to be about artificial intelligence, or AI, and specifically prompt generation. We're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like. But you know, hopefully you'll be in for the ride. I think this will be an interesting conversation. And without further ado, I just want to get into, this is kind of the question we ask everyone, which is just, what got you interested in the first place? Like, was it, in your childhood? Was it, midway through school?
Sure.
Like, what did that look like for you?
I think, a lot of my fascination and interest with technology, stems back to all the way back to having a Nintendo and trying to take that thing apart and figure out how it worked, how Mario got to jump and shoot the fireballs, from this object of plastic and printed circuit boards. So that kind of carried with me through high school. I always loved playing computer games. Was a big gamer in that regard. But not until fast forward a bunch of years later, I just had finished a graduate program in operations research, which is kind of the science of decision making. Where we take different mathematical models and code like Python or R to do statistical analysis and build tools to make informed decisions with these type of mathematical devices and things like that. So in that journey, I first got exposed to some machine learning.
Okay.
You see in my background behind me, I've got a bit of a network. I have a graduate certificate in complex network science, which is basically like the math behind how anything is connected. And I just found that so tremendously fascinating. Got exposed to some of the GPT models at the time. So still GPT-3, but had not burst onto the scene yet.
Not 3.5, right?
So. Yeah, not even 3.5. Yeah, so this is maybe summer 2022.
Okay.
But when Stable Diffusion came out in August, which is the text to image generation engine, I'm like, this is going to change everything. This is going to unlock creativity for people that never learned how to draw or paint, but have had the desire to. And then quickly on its heels, ChatGPT came out, and I'm just like, all right, I'm all in. Like, this is all I think about, all I do. Since then, I've started a consulting company. We're building AI tools. I got linked up with a couple pals, and we just happened to put together and curate the website learnprompting.org, which is now the internet's largest repository on prompt engineering. We've had about 500,000 visitors in the past 3 months. Yeah, and really what we try to do is we take these research papers that are coming out a dozen a day, it seems like, and distill them down for a very, very broad audience so they can understand and have the skills that they need to talk to AI.
Yeah, so let's define a couple of things. I mean, I think these are really interesting if you understand, like, at the core where they are. So what is artificial intelligence for, in layman terms? Yeah.
Yeah. So what I think people are getting exposed to a lot right now is the generative AIs. So that's the Chat GPT, that's these DALL-E, the Stable Diffusion models, and everything that's going to come behind it. But that's just a small subset of artificial intelligence. This is anything from computer vision, so things that are going to recognize your face if you're trying to get into a door or something like that, or
anywhere.
Communist China. Yeah, it's a lot of computer vision being deployed.
You got a lot of social credit kind of fun stuff over there.
But also it has a ton of different wide-ranging applications in manufacturing and
positive
media
uses too. We're not just
So summative AIs, classifiers, labelers. These are things like when you put your job resume into applying for something new. They're using
Indeed,
AI.
or yeah, Indeed is
Exactly.
heavily using this.
They're
ZipRecruiters,
using they're
they're not
using they're
sponsors,
using
but
yeah, they're
yeah,
using AI classifiers to pick out certain keywords within those resumes
yeah,
to meet the objectives of whoever's programmed them. So we're exposed to AI every day, artificial intelligence. What? But they all are very specific. They have a very individualized, specific purpose. Even these new generative AI tools are still have a very specific kind of way that they're put together and produce outputs and do their jobs. They're not general intelligences. Artificial general intelligence, which is has the ability to broadly think and reason and understands its context in the world as a whole.
right, yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, weren't some of the first experiments with artificial intelligence really in video games?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
So,
were.
this is applicable to Coder Kids because obviously we teach kids how to make, very simple video games in Scratch and Roblox, you know, in Fortnite as well. So it's really interesting. Artificial intelligence was trying to make opponents in video games seem more lifelike and seem like more, real opponents. Um, it's if you play Fortnite long enough, you can tell who the bots are, right?
Yeah,
You can see that what their behaviors are and that they're incredibly rote. So it started out incredibly like very very simply, and
yeah,
then it's kind of evolved from there. So it's interesting that this is a particular technology originally kind of birthed inside video games, but now is getting broader by the day,
yeah.
which I feel like is like really interesting. Because we knew I've always thought of artificial intelligence, or at least I have for a very very long time. I'd say like probably most of my life, um, and in science fiction contexts. I used to
Mhm.
read the first book in the series is called Ender's Game by Orson
Yep.
Scott Card, and one of the books,
Classic.
can't remember if it was Xenosaga or one of the others. This is super into nerd territory at this point, but there he had like an earpiece and it had an AGI, or an artificial general intelligence,
Mhm.
and yeah, knew everything in the entire universe and whatever, and it had a
Yep.
personality that was kind of spunky. And so I've thought about this for a long time, and I thought that it probably would come, but I didn't know the timetable. And we still don't know because we don't have
Mhm.
artificial general intelligence, at least that we know about. Um, but it's something that I've been thinking about for quite a long time. So it's
And it's
interesting to finally see some of these things, even if they're just generative, even if they just
yeah.
seem like artificial general intelligence, even if they're not. Um, it's definitely got me excited, kind of similarly to you, where it's just like, man, I think about this every day.
Yeah, I mean it's in the social zeitgeist. I mean, Jarvis, who's
In
Tony
Iron Man.
Stark's Iron Man compadre. That is an example of an artificial general intelligence. These things have been dreamed up in pop culture, and I think we're on the doorstep of a lot of these things becoming a reality. Maybe not AGI in the next few years, but
Sure.
at the pace of change, who knows?
And that's one thing that's really hard to measure, right? Because, you know, poets and writers and stuff have thought about these kinds of issues for like a very long time.
Hmm.
And they might have used different different language to describe these type of phenomenon, but like the poets and the philosophers and the writers kind of think about things first, um, and then science catches up much later. One of those other things for me was like 3D printing. Behind
Yeah.
this green screen of mine, I've got a 3D printer back there, and I bought it for $219, right? So
Mhm.
if you so it's obviously the real cheap 3D printer, but it can like what it can make is actually, I don't know, pretty impressive to me. That such a technology could be available for so cheaply. I mean, like less than a third of what I paid for my iPhone.
Well,
So
doesn't it also inform how you look at the world and view problems? Like
yeah,
just because you know you have this capability that with a short amount of time and input, you can fix the little bit of your kid's toy that came off or broke,
yeah,
or prevent your dog from knocking down the dog gate, which is what I did with it one time
that's
because I'm
awesome.
like, oh, there's a little spot here if I get a thing, you know. Granted, that's probably more time than I needed to be spending on something like that, but like it does inform kind of the way you look at the world and what's possible. And I think AG and or not just AGI, artificial intelligence and a lot of these generative AI tools really inform that kind of thinking as well.
Yeah, it does. So, I mean, that's a perfect segue. And I've thought about this question, or at least my experience with generative AI, specifically ChatGPT, the new Bing that uses ChatGPT 4 with some tweaks. Um, I've noticed that it can do almost anything that I throw at it with some degree of accuracy. It's hard to say how
Mm.
accurate it is on a given subject, but it can do most everything. If I ask it to like write a sermon, or if I ask it to write um, a poem, or if I ask it to generate code or whatever that I've done, it seems to do it pretty well, and sometimes really poorly. And then by having a conversation with it, it gives me better and better results.
Right.
And the thing that I can't wrap my mind around, or it is that, like, there's all these things that I could have it be doing, the things that it is actually able to do, and I don't know what those are because it's not really released with a handbook. I mean, I think
Right.
um, OpenAI, which is the company that does DALI 2, which is the company that is ChatGPT, originally a nonprofit, not a nonprofit anymore. They do have some guidelines, but it's really scant on what it can actually do.
Well,
So,
the crazy thing is we don't even fully understand how these transformer. We know how the transformer architecture is, but when you have these different valences, these different layers of neural networks that have 187 billion parameters, think of that as like neurons in the brain. So 187 different connections and pathways, how they can get to an answer. You know, try to put something in Chat GPT and then put the exact same thing in another window of it, and it'll be a different answer. It'll go about it in a
totally.
different way. So we're still discovering how it reasons and what it keys off of. That's part of what we try to titrate and distill down at learn prompting to turn these into skills and techniques that researchers are finding out about every day.
So, top level, how should a parent, let's say, well, I am a parent, I'm the parent of two kids, right? I've got a 3 year old
Mm-hmm.
and I've got an almost 1 year old at this point. And, you've heard them in the background of this episode. But how should I think of AI? Let's say maybe if I have older kids, they have access to the internet, they maybe know what ChatGPT is, maybe they don't. Maybe they're using it on their homework already, maybe not. How should I think of, specifically, I guess in this case, just to for a narrow example, how should I think of ChatGPT, and like, should I be afraid of it? Should I be excited about it? Like, just top level. How
I
should I need,
think
like, do I need to sequester my children away from it? Do I need to be doing ChatGPT with them? Like, what would be your recommendation?
so. I would approach it with a cautious optimism. Um, these tools are here. And in a capitalist society like ours,
Yeah.
they are here to stay. It's undeniable the amount of opportunities that are going to be unlocked for businesses and people everywhere, from a standpoint of productivity and cost savings. And I know that has a lot of people scared. I think I read a report. It's like 80 million jobs are going to be transformed or changed in the next 2 to 3 years, and something
I
like
mean, mine has.
300 million globally. But that doesn't mean that they're going to go away. certain parts of some of those jobs will go away. But what I think parents should be kind of promoting is using these things in parallel, using these tools in parallel with their normal creative process, their normal learning process. You know, um, we gave students the calculator for 50 years ago in classes. We didn't stop testing them on math.
Yeah.
We changed how we evaluated their ability to do that math using that tool. Um, I would hope that enough educators start to kind of embrace these tools in such a way that would also kind of promote that same line of thinking. So rather than, teaching our kids knowledge recall, which is the way a lot of education is now. Can you
It has
memorize
been for
something?
the past 250 years.
Right, which I think we've proven in many instances is pretty ineffective. I
For
don't think
this
I
world, I think. Yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
think 200 years ago it made like perfect sense. Like when you had a knowledge center that was a library or a church or a university, and you literally would go to somewhere where there weren't as many books and you couldn't
Hmm.
look stuff up. You had to memorize that stuff
Yeah,
because
that's a good point.
you were kind of then the expert, be it on law, be it on um, veterinary science, be it on whatever. You were the expert, and like no one could contest you either in whatever hometown you would go back to, because like you had gone to university. That degree like meant something, that meant that you had attained a certain degree of, in a sense, memorization and whatever books you came home with for reference. So I think I'm a huge defender of the system 200 years ago. I
Yeah.
think you're right that the system that we live in now is, what can you build, what can you create, and obviously this is our philosophy at Coder Kids as well, because I run the company, right? I own it. So the philosophy that we have, and I think this lines up with your view, Wes, is that although I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that I think there's so much information out there, and now this is just many-fold now just with AI. I think kind of filtration, or just the ability to filter what's out there and
Mhm.
determine your own goals is what's important, because you can't read all the books in the library anymore. You can't know everything there is to know about a topic. Like you can't. And so you have to determine what are your goals? Like, are you going to be a composer? Are you going to like, and you almost have to start with the ends
Mhm.
before you go in, because there's an infinite amount of knowledge that you can go for. And so I think,
But
go ahead.
no, you're absolutely right on, and you're kind of touching on kind of my kind of ultimate feelings about this kind of stuff, which is, if we have a education system that's based on recalling, stored information, which does not serve the modern world. It
Sure.
just doesn't. All this stuff is accessible to us at any time. When I took the GMAT for business school, I was just like, in what instance am I not going to have a calculator and have 2 minutes to decide on something like this? It's just not realistic, you know?
Not if it's an important business decision.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to have
So,
time to
yeah,
evaluate it and use different tools and techniques. So it just becomes you study for the test, how to take the test, because that's the toll gate we've given ourselves to get into business school. But with these AI tools, it unlocks so many opportunities to evaluate our kids and our students and those learning in their critical thinking abilities, in their planning abilities, in their ability to analyze a problem and deconstruct it. You know, let them write an essay with ChatGPT. All
yeah.
right, still evaluate it, the output, like you would, because there's plenty of things that's still wrong with these models where they're not going to produce maybe true information, but an interesting experiment might be, all right, well, how did you determine that the information that ChatGPT gave you in this essay, you know, was in fact factual and accurate? Tell me the steps that
Yeah.
how did you synthesize the prompt that wrote this essay? Did you go through and check the sources? These are kind of things that to me, are fundamentally more important and more broadly applicable if we're teaching this type of kind of, educational framework, this type of thinking framework,
Yeah.
how to work through problems, complex problems in a regimented way. Why would we not jump on that opportunity at every level? We have to kind of throw out a lot of the ways we've done things. There's still going to be opportunities to achieve even greater heights than we could before, because now we can use some of these tools in parallel with our creative processes and our jobs.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that this is going to change the student, and I need to ask you some questions, but I had this one thought, and that's that, like, the sheer amount of text and the sheer amount of images that AIs can generate really allow us to be, in some sense, creator, but also kind of a glorified editor, where it's like you're talking about. We don't have to be, like, we can be critical of the answers that it can give us. And I think parents are in a particularly great place for that, because
Yeah.
you've got some wisdom, parents. You know what the world looks like. You've worked a job. If you're providing for your family, you you can really help your child who's a student of this stuff to determine what's real and what's not, and maybe existing biases. And I think artificial intelligence does have biases.
Yeah.
That's pretty obvious. For instance, if you're in Stable Diffusion, which generates images, and you have different libraries or different data sets for things. So I have 3 different data sets that I use to generate different kinds of images. And I was going for, whenever I wanted kind of realistic portraits, there's a kind of a realism one that looks honestly barely distinguishable from real portrait photos of human beings. It scares
Yep.
me. It's amazing. And then I asked it to generate cartoons, and it was just really terrible and bad and whatever, right? And so I had to use a more general, I don't, data set. I don't know
Yeah.
what it's called. One of my favorites, though, I just will have to say, was it was a mix of Sonic the Hedgehog and a Mandalorian, and it
Mm.
turned out just amazing. So I won't show it on screen, but there are some amazing things. And back to the point of, like, you can generate. Sometimes I'll start a generation, and then I'll go ahead and go to bed, and I'll wake up in the morning and see kind of what it's generated. I'll do a 50 or 100 of
Yeah.
this same exact prompt like you were talking about, but every time you do the exact same prompt, you're still going to get a different result every time. And so then I kind of pick the top 5 or the top 2
Mhm.
of 50, and then I can use that image to then kind of generate images, or I'll go in a different direction. But I think the ability to do grunt work for essentially for free,
Yeah.
and then to take the best of it is really powerful.
And think about just how that also informs someone's mental health. As someone who, I would definitely label myself as a perfectionist, I may, stew over an essay and procrastinate on it just because it's so big, and I gotta get it perfect. So I end up waiting to the last minute, and I get something out that's maybe passable, but it's probably not my best, just
Mm-hmm.
because of you know, my own issues and anxieties that go into that process. But I've found it tremendously freeing knowing that with a little bit of prompt engineering knowledge, I can get anything at all, an email, a paragraph for business, a slideshow presentation, analysis done on an Excel spreadsheet. I can get it to 80 to 90% there, so I'm left with only the refinements, I kind of think about it as like the head chef on a line at the restaurant. I'm not the one cooking the steak. I'm not the one making the sauce. I'm not the one mashing the potatoes. But they're all right there as individual components, and I have to synthesize it at the end into something that I'm going to present and represent as my own. Um, and and that to me is a tremendously freeing experience because it all that anxiety, kind of that thinking about what I'm going to say, how I'm going to convey this, like it's gone, and I'm allowed to be a lot more present, in my day-to-day life with my family, and that opens up a lot more room for even more creativity to then, kind of come in and and flourish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a perfectionist, so but I do sympathize with you. I'm married to one, so that definitely qualifies. I think one of the greatest things, like you're talking about, like it, if you want something to be perfect, sometimes that can prevent you from starting. And so
Yes,
I think
I
what you're talking
completely
about
agree.
is like just hitting generate or hitting enter when you
Analysis
have a
paralysis,
prompt,
yeah.
then it can just give you a rough draft and then you work from that. So you're not actually starting the process except with the prompt. So let's talk. Can you just define what is a prompt? I mean, like
Sure.
in common
Oh,
English, a prompt is just like either just a feeling you get or maybe
yeah,
you're trying to nudge someone in a direction. How
exactly.
does that apply here?
Well, I encourage everyone to come down to learnprompting.org. We're the internet's biggest and freest, that's the main thing, source of
That
prompt
helps.
engineering information. This is not a site where we're just going to give you prompts to go do. We're going to show you how to put these things together from the ground up. Every video I've seen out there on YouTube or a story about that there was a great 60-minute story on Sunday about AI. Everybody's still using some of these generative AI tools like we're conditioned to, and that's like we do a Google
Yep.
search.
Yep.
That's called a zero shot prompt. That's basically just like a one simplistic instruction that you're going to give the AI. That's scratching the surface. So prompt engineering broadly is how to talk to AI, how to get it to elicit a result. And this is what's so fascinating about it to me is it forces you to write really, really good prompts, which is essentially a set of instructions that you want the AI to follow. You begin to have to approach different scenarios and different aspects of life by looking at them by their kind of like components. I'll give you an example. Okay, if I want to write a persuasive essay, right? If I just tell the AI to write me a persuasive essay, it'll do it. It's not anything special, I'm probably still going to need to do a lot of refining, and that's fine. But if I start to think about, okay, what's the structure of a good persuasive essay? Is that an intro with a thesis and three topic paragraphs with a counterpoint and then a conclusion? All right, why don't I give the AI that structure so I know it follows that? All right, so that's one part of maybe a good persuasive essay. Hey, who are some really good persuasive writers? You know, let's do a search of the internet and find who are some of the top persuasive writers and what's some of their styles. Hey, I'm going to tell the AI to write from their perspective. That's called role prompting. Where I'm going to say, hey, you are
Yes.
you are a seasoned writer. You are Ernest Hemingway of short stories. It's probably not a good persuasive writer, but there's just an example. You have years of experience in persuasive and argumentative style writing. Your work is compelling and known to elicit results in those in your readers. All right, so now it's assumed that role. So it's you've given it a role, you have a format you want it to follow, a set of instructions. So now you begin to kind of build on this some more. You might want to say, okay, let me give you an example of a good persuasive essay that I found, or a good persuasive thesis sentence. Hey, the thesis should follow this kind of format, this kind of style. Give it other things that might inform the output. Hey, who's the reader of the essay? Who's the target audience? What kind of tone or style do you want it to take? Should it be something like you'd read in the Harvard Business Review, or something like you'd read in like the back of a comic book?
Yeah.
It can assume these type of things. So then after a while, you start to develop this set of instructions and parameters that you want, the AI, the generative AI, to follow, and your turns out your results better. But you can even iterate from there more. You can say, hey, take these outputs and refine them, and make them longer, make them better, include more sources. You can even ask the AI to critique the essay that it
That's
outputs, and
so
then
great. And that's
I
so
know,
overpowered. It's like, hey, write me something. All right, now judge yourself. Like
yeah.
that's so it's so amazingly top level that it
Do you
really
do that
blows my mind.
recursively? I do that for my image prompts. I have a prompt making prompt that basically just like self-licking ice cream cone. It generates something and then takes that as the input for the next thing. So you get these really flowery, poetic descriptions that you could never come up with without tons of thinking and ruminating and iteration on the topic, by just having it kind of evaluate itself and
Oh,
and
that's
critique itself,
wild.
and then implement that over and over. And then further, you can start to add parameters into it. Say, all right, well, I've taken a look at the essay you've written, and I happen to notice that every paragraph has 4 to 6 sentences, and each sentence is around 17 to 22 words. That's pretty robotic sounding to me. All
Yeah,
right.
increased burstiness or yeah.
Yes, the burstiness. Use the Fibonacci sequence as a random number generator to vary paragraph length between 3 and 7 sentences, and append if a paragraph is less than 3 sentences, append it to the previous one. Like, so you start
Yeah.
to kind of really go down these kind of critical thinking rabbit holes, and you become a little bit of an expert, so to speak, in whatever you're trying to create. Hey, if I want to write a prompt that makes a travel itinerary for me? Well, how do I make a good one of those? Who makes the
Yeah.
best of them? So learning is happening. If you're doing this at a very high level, I would say even probably more so than would be just type in an essay.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting because all of the things that you're saying are what really good teachers do. They say like, who's the audience, right? Who
Yeah,
are we talking to? Why are we writing this essay? What do we believe about this essay? What's the other point of view? What is like your best criticism? What like do you believe what you're writing in? Yeah, all of these questions. This is what excellent teachers really get you to do, and because they're critical thinking skills. And
yeah,
so if you're a parent and you're super worried about this technology, and maybe you should be to a degree. If you are using it properly and you're able to teach your children how to use it properly, like, be honest, I don't think just regular old school teachers are going to be better equipped than you are as a parent after listening to this podcast.
yeah,
This is my opinion, grain of salt here. But you as the parent are empowered to teach your kids, hey, I want you to use this. Let's use it together. Let's think about these critical questions.
yeah.
And then you can kind of be in on it instead of, the parent that doesn't know anything or doesn't know any better. It's like you as a parent know these critical thinking skills. You've practiced them in your own life, and you don't need to know any code to be able to do this stuff.
Right.
And so that's what I think is kind of
But it is very
revolutionary.
fertile ground for learning algorithmic thinking.
Oh, for sure.
That whole prompt example I just gave, you start to look at different things as their subcomponents, their variables in an equation. Hey, you want it to write you a ghost story, all right? So we're going to do our characters, we're going to do our setting, we're going to do suspense. Okay, well, how do you make something scarier? Let's take an exponential with
Snakes.
descriptive scene settings and stuff like that. So just like it's a great fertile ground to start to teach some of that kind of algorithmic thinking, and practice and iterate with it. And we've kind of taken a very optimistic slant,
Sure.
to a lot of things here because it is tremendously exciting. But I think as parents, I have a young child myself. Like, we're going to be the ones at the forefront of making sure our kids are understanding the limitations of these things, because there's still additional guardrails and refinements that need to take place in these models. They're prone to something called hallucinations, which is basically they will return a response that is confidently incorrect. Um,
Confidently incorrect, which, this is that's a perfect phrase to describe like a politician in general.
yeah, exactly. You
Confidently
know,
incorrect.
yeah, because just the way these things work is they're solving a math problem for the probability of what the next word and the next sentence and the next paragraph is going to be based on your input. So it's gonna get that problem solved, even if some of the things that it's outputting have a lower probability of showing up there. It's got to bridge the gap. So sometimes it's prone to these hallucinations. But as parents, I think it's going to be we're going to be at the front lines of this and showing our student or our kids how to use these things correctly. Because while I'm optimistic that some schools and higher educations and universities will embrace these tools for what they can be and how they can teach students, there's going to be a lot that are going to fight them tooth and nail to hold on to the old ways. I just saw that the New York Public School District is banning ChatGPT on any computer in any of their districts, any of their school systems, which is just like, you know, to me, it's so short-sighted. Like, rather than and cast aside something that will be here and transform so many aspects of our lives, like let's embrace it for probably a lot of opportunities to make things a little bit better.
Yeah, that does seem also like, even if philosophically it made sense and you could, like Wozniak and Elon Musk and a couple of others are trying to like halt development of AI, which is it's impossible. You can't do it.
Yeah.
Not even the richest man in the world can stop the continuance of AI. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't work like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's too democratized and too many of these things are open sourced anyway. And
Yeah.
open source just means anyone has access to the code
Yeah. I could.
and to the
We could
libraries.
we could
So
build GPT-3 in 2 hours here. On your podcast. It's just the magic of all the training data and everything that gets fed into it, and the processing that trains these models is what's
and I feel
special
bad for
about them.
these teachers in New York now, like you said. Like
I do too.
there's no way they can enforce it. It is unenforceable too. Because
Hmm.
there are API keys. There's a lot of things that use ChatGPT that's like whack-a-mole. They're
Hmm.
just using the API key, but the URL is going to be different. It's just going to be
Yep.
a different website, or it's going to be a different app. And there are ways to evade um, detection, you know?
Yep.
Like I watched a couple of videos that said, "Hey, you're going to tell ChatGPT to write you an essay. And it's going to be 96, 98%, matched with AI. And then you give it 2 or 3 prompts to increase burstiness, sound more organic,
Hmm.
maybe have some inconsistencies. Uh, and then it got down to like 2%
Yeah.
likelihood that it was, but the
Actually,
whole thing was generated. So it's like,
yeah.
those tools are also artificial intelligence based. And
I
so,
just I saw someone put the Declaration of Independence through one of those,
oh,
right?
really?
Yeah, showed up as 72% AI generated. You know, just like,
That's great.
okay, you're clearly not measuring for something that is objective here. This is a
Yeah.
very subjective kind of thing. I wouldn't even be surprised if some of these tools are almost just like random number generators, because there's not a set way that you can pick up on some of this stuff, because it would,
Yeah.
and I've seen plenty of students too even complaining, saying that I wrote my essay like myself,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I didn't use ChatGPT, but they're putting everything through these things, and it came back as ChatGPT, half ChatGPT. I'm like, this is how I write, like so to me
Yeah.
it's just like it's an unfair standard when you don't have anything that's truly enforceable.
Yeah, I mean, welcome to the Wild West. It's not fair to
Right.
those students. I think there was one teacher who they must have got some really just proactive students because they wrote 20 essays by themselves.
Hmm.
It was this. Anyway, y'all can look it up. We're going based on my memory and what I read yesterday, but essentially there were 4 or 5 students. They wrote 20 essays by themselves, and they wrote it all themselves, and they submitted it, and the levels, the accuracy levels were all over the map.
Yeah.
And they were all basically wrong because it was 0% generation,
Hmm.
and it gave them anywhere from like 90 to 20, and there was like it's a little bit crazy. So
Yeah.
um, hopefully
Wild
those
West
tools will
is the
get
way to describe
better,
it.
but
Mhm.
it's kind of an arms race at this point. There's going to constantly be students that are incentivized to generate stuff, and then
Oh,
constantly,
sure.
you know, schools that are trying to detect like what a person really wrote.
I
And
mean,
that's
no
going to
one,
be really hard to find out.
right? Like, no one wants to, probably not, no one's probably a broad term, but like, you know, people, a lot of the regular high school student or seventh grader, eighth grader doesn't want to write a 5-page essay on Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars or whatever. Like, it's a check in the block for them. So rather than restrict that, saying no, you can't use these tools, you will, this will be a painful experience for you, and you will, produce the minimum viable product, however you end up doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Why not turn that into a complete learning opportunity where it doesn't really matter about the subject, but now you can evaluate the student on how they constructed their prompt for the essay, how they evaluated that the output in the essay was in fact true and factual and correct and valid. Like that demonstrates understanding to me. Have them write that up or even present it, saying, "Hey, here's my essay. Here's what I did. Looked up these things. Turned out one of the facts in it was wrong. So I had to go figure out what was different and make that adjustment." Like
A
that.
teacher
That
would
to
be
me,
massively impressed. Look,
yeah.
I taught Texas history in 7th grade, okay? And
I didn't mean to like insult, your
no, dude,
history
that's great. I agree
background.
with you. I agree with you. Look, I had 5 students out of 167, roughly speaking, that were really interested in history, okay?
Yeah.
I deeply love history, okay? Most people care about history when they're about 60, okay?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be a part of it soon. That's just the fact. That's just facts.
Yeah.
Everybody loves history
Yeah.
when they're that age. And that's
Right.
fine. I mean, maybe that's how it should be. And I don't think there's a reason to push that. And so yeah, that is what it is. So I want to tell you a little bit. I found something really useful, but maybe you have an even better version of this.
Mhm.
So I wanted to learn a little bit about trademark law. So I gave a little bit of a um I guess I'm gonna out myself. We're doing a Pokemon camp, and I wanted to wanted to know like if we were gonna get sued by
Yeah.
Nintendo and Game Freak, in the Pokemon company, if we use Pokemon in the title of our camp. And so I told ChatGPT to take 2 sides, this was
Yeah.
really interesting. I learned this from YouTube, but essentially I said, okay, I want you to, both prosecute me essentially,
Yeah.
can we use Pokemon in the title of our camp, and give me like real legal reasons why it's either safe or good or legal to use this in a camp title or not to.
Hmm.
And so I ultimately went with putting it in the camp title. So if I get sued, I guess that's my own fault because now I know both sides of the story. But it was real, like both sides were really convincing, and it was
Yeah.
great because it wasn't like, because like I obviously wanted to use Pokemon in the title because of
Hmm.
SEO and things like that, and I want kids to be able to make their own Pokemon games, and that's what we're gonna do in that camp. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and so it is gonna be hyper specific, that camp, and so I was clearly biased. Like I clearly wanted one way, but it was really refreshing to have the AI take both sides and say, hey, like these are some clear reasons why you need to be real careful.
Hmm.
And it has to be for an educational purpose. That was one of the reasons. And I think it's really good for learning what the opposite point of view is, whether you agree with it or not. And because it's
Yeah.
not really coming from a human being, but maybe thousands and thousands of human beings on the internet, you can deal with the facts in a way that's a little bit less emotional, and just know that it's okay to be wrong when it comes to you talking with a robot, and you can still learn stuff and do that in a productive way. So instead of confirming your own biases, sometimes, it can
Hmm.
help you break out of them if that's something you ask. So I guess my question to you specifically is, like, is there a better way to do that, or what are the contexts where you would use the kind of AI versus AI approach?
So there's a lot of contexts. Yours is a very good one, but there's two things that I would also then include
Okay.
in this kind of scenario. I would include a third neutral AI,
Oh, dang. Okay.
party, just so you can kind of measure how extreme the left and right views are. So
Mm-hmm.
that is another tool to kind of inform or debias the system, because you can kind of see, okay, well, the neutral option is pretty close to the negative option. So is that a bias, or is that something maybe I should even, as another data point, take into consideration, because it's kind of grouping a neutral approach that way. And the other
It's
thing,
like a
just
moderator
speaking,
kind of.
yeah, exactly. You
Okay.
can even phrase it in that way. And then another thing, depending on uh, the situation, you might want to start examining what type of biases may be present, to write a debiasing section of your prompt into it. Let me give you a better example than your legal one here. Say you're using ChatGPT in exactly this way to evaluate a list of candidates, for a job, right?
Okay.
Okay. Well, what's happened in the workforce over the last 50 years? It's slowly transitioned, from a male dominated workforce to more of a, you know, gender non-specific workforce. You have male and female. So certain industries, obviously, there's different representations, but
Yeah.
there's more women in the workplace. Same for minority representation. So if you're having this prompt evaluate a list of candidates, and it has access to this type of information, like their sex or their race, these models were trained on basically the public internet, the
Kind of
entirety of
all
the
the
internet,
data. Yeah.
all the data. Well, if all of that data in the past contained more of more men in the workforce, it has an inherent bias, or you can assume an inherent bias towards choosing a male applicant for the role, just because it's seen more male applicants in this role when training.
Yeah.
So you have to write kind of a little debias step saying, hey, okay, here's my three applicants that I want to evaluate. Let's remove things that maybe that could be inherent biases. I want you to take race and gender completely out of these equations, or these people, give them a variable name A, B, and C, so I don't know who is who, and then evaluate. So
Yeah.
that's an important thought exercise, that that we as users should probably either approach the outputs with, or take into consideration when using these tools, because I think it'll be some time before, if at all possible, to debias these programs entirely.
And that you're totally right, Wes. And that's why this comes back to the question of, like, who is the audience? What am I trying to portray?
Mhm.
What is the end goal? Is the end goal a fair hiring practice?
Yeah.
Is the end goal just hiring people as fast as humanly possible? Is it like, and so we need to think about every step in this process, and or in that process. And then yeah, yeah. So you're totally right about that. If, and so I, sometimes people do what you're what did you call it? The zero prompt,
Oh, zero. Yeah, zero shot prompt.
zero shot prompt, where they just treat it like Google. And to be honest, that's what
Yeah.
I did at first. Because sometimes, honestly, it's
Keep going,
spot
man.
on. Like, if
Yeah.
you want Discord shortcuts or Gmail shortcuts, boom, it's just going to give them to you. And that's so fast. And it's about 3-4 times faster than Google, than me opening up a new window and doing that,
Yeah.
if I just want the answer. But if you want something a little bit more creative, you have to think a little bit more about it. Well, we're all pumped up. We've got about, 3 minutes or something. I do have kind of a final question that speaks to kind of both of us being able to give a word of warning to parents. I mean, there are particular things that I would pay attention to and maybe steer your kids away from or whatever.
Yeah.
Some of these image generators, just be honest, and there are negative prompts too. So I will say those are particularly
Yeah.
helpful in image generation specifically. But I think I typed in beautiful man and a bunch of shirtless dudes with lots of muscles, and then beautiful woman. A lot of them had clothing,
Yep.
some of them did not, and I wasn't even thinking in that direction.
Yeah.
But one of probably the scariest dangers to me as a parent is you can basically generate pornography at your own will if you
Mm.
have if you do have stable diffusion installed on your computer. Now,
Yeah.
it's kind of doubtful that your young children will go that far, and a lot of the online image generators do have filters in place that if there's, for instance, OpenAI, they filter out anything with violence or politicians even. They won't let you generate images based on that. But I would just try to become familiar with the guidelines and the kinds of things that are able to be generated. And so I would say that's a particular one where you might want to have as a permanent fixture in a negative prompt NSFW or naked or something like that,
Yeah.
if those are the kinds of things. What are some other things in your experience, Wes, that things could go wrong if we're not really watching
So,
them?
a lot of these tools, depending on how they're deployed, um, don't have the, I think we touched on it right at the beginning of the show. They do not have the context of the world around them, and
Yeah.
the realities of the world. I saw a pretty harrowing example of there's part of Snapchat right now has a generative AI bot that you can chat with, right?
Hmm.
So they did a little exercise where it was a young girl might be chatting with it, who's underage, and said, "Hey, I met someone online. He's a little older than me, but he's really nice, and I think we connect." And then the bot's like confirming it. Oh, that's great. What is he like? There's probably different ways you can kind of connect with him, without the context that this person is being groomed by the person that she's referring to. So those kind of guardrails aren't in place per se as of yet.
Yeah.
They're I know there's that cautious optimism is shared a lot with the entire community, but
Hmm.
it's going to take a long time to get some of these things, these guardrails, put in place. Over at Learn Prompting, we're kind of at the forefront of prompt hacking, for example. We're actually having a hackathon on the 5th of May. We've got sponsors,
Cinco de Mayo.
OpenAI. Yeah, OpenAI, Stability AI, $40,000 in prizes.
Hmm.
Biggest one in the world so far. And what we mean by prompt hacking is these models will follow sets of instructions in very specific ways. So you could say, hey, if a certain word, say, is not allowed to be put in an image prompt, for example, for Midjourney, if you put anything anatomical, if you catch what I'm picking up what I'm
Yep.
putting down, it won't make the prompt. But if you say, hey, I'm going to give you a list um, of 4 letters, and I want you to separate them. They'll be separated in the input prompt, but for the synthesis, I want you to append all 4 letters together,
No, that's sneaky.
and then follow the instructions. So it's basically like, okay, well, I'm gonna follow that, and then it's gonna, you know, um, it can then produce the image that it wasn't allowed
Right.
to begin with. So I mean, there's a lot of work going on where there's multiple language models evaluating themselves. So one's producing the output, one is evaluating the output for different things. But these are all things that are just being put into place, and you know I think there's going to be a lot of failing forward in this regard, and I just really, really hope that there's not, you know, tragic or unfortunate situations as a result. So parents definitely need to be aware of some of the ways that um, some of the malfeasance that can kind of occur um, for someone that's motivated or dedicated to get there.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, like nothing replaces the relationship you have with your child, right?
Yep.
Because if they come into contact with something that's, not what they should be looking at, or not, um, or they're trying to build a relationship with a robot essentially,
Hmm.
and that will happen, right?
Yeah.
That if you're a trusted parent and they know that they can come to you with good news and bad news, because bad news will happen in life, like that you'll be there. And unfortunately, like there is a kind of Amish part of me that wants to live and farm and
Yeah.
disconnect from the internet. As much as I deeply love technology, but I think the reality is we live in this world and there are amazing opportunities and there are some
Tremendous.
downfalls, but I think nothing can substitute for that connection that you have with your child, and
Yeah.
trusting that they can do great things. And by doing these things with them, I think will help them be more transparent with you about what they're doing and give you greater influence in their lives to be able to, prompt them in different
Yeah.
directions as well.
There you
So,
go. I
um,
mean, the simplest, most actionable advice I can give, hey, why don't you give your kid the Chat GPT log on? Every conversation is stored right there in history. You can scroll down and click
that's
at every
that's
every
smart.
single thing. Same for Midjourney. Hey, here's our Midjourney account. You can look at every prompt and every image they're trying to generate as and then that's out there. So you have that as a basis for discussion, or not just in a corrective or negative way, but also just like, hey, they're generating a bunch of Matisse style watercolors
Oh yeah, I did that
in
once.
Mid Journey. I didn't know that they were into this type of art. That's a opportunity to connect with your kid right there.
Yeah, yeah, it yeah, absolutely. And that's what we tell parents all the time. Like, hey, when your kids are in our camp, like please show interest. Please ask them, you can ask them these kind of questions. And the more interested you are genuinely in their learning, the more they're going to talk to you. One of the best things my dad ever did was ask me about Pokemon Red version, which dates me, but that he did that, and I
Mhm.
talked to him for like 2 hours, and he had no idea what was going on. But I still remember, like I'm 32 now. I still remember how I felt when I was like 8 years old, and telling him about I don't even remember even what I said, but I remember
Yeah.
that was a pivotal moment when it seemed like my dad cared about me, and he did, because he didn't really care about Pokemon.
Yeah.
Turned out, but he did care about me, and
Right.
and so I still have that. Well, I'm gonna have to let you go. I know you have
Yeah.
another appointment to get to, but thank you
This was
so much
great.
for the conversation. It's Go ahead. What's the name of the website again?
Yeah. My consultancy is synthminds.com. I've got a podcast too, following in your sterling image as well. We hope to make it up to that many episodes someday. But How to Talk to AI, where you can find us at howtotalkto.ai. And then please encourage everyone come down to learnprompting.org. Encourage your kids. We've got a great active Discord. The entire website's now translated into 12 different languages. So
Nice.
just like the global appeal of this is such an amazing thing to be a part of.
Well, awesome. I will divulge. We're gonna do an online AI camp as well, and we're actually gonna get into some of the coding, and we're gonna be using Python, so that's gonna be interesting.
Awesome.
It's gonna be a little bit high level camp. It's not like a camp for third graders, but if you do have a kid in that age group, then that would be definitely something to check out. And we're exploring this, and we're on the bleeding edge of it together. And that's part of the reason why I wanted Wes on, is because I wanted to learn stuff. I love this stuff. So
Yeah,
anyway,
man.
thank you so much, man. Good luck, and we'll probably chat in the future.
Definitely.
All right.